So I again went back to check all the Chapter 5 weapons compared to their ballistic counterparts to see any more subtle noticeable changes, just like the MP5, and I caught three. There might be more because the last two are very subtle, and this one is the only heavily obvious out of all of them. But, anyways, starting off with it, just like the MP5, the selector also has changes to it. Not only is it appearing on the left now, which makes it ambidextrous, which I don't know if is realistic to the vector, but I do know at least it's better to have it on the left side because these are right-handed weapons and not left-handed weapons. But that gives me hope for the collateral damage AR at the very least, if it's ever to be added to ballistic, because then it would have its selector on the left and maybe in a more M4 style position rather than the HK416 style position. But anyways, it's straightforward on the old one and is positioned more downwards, just like the MP5, which is very cool. And speaking of it, it's also the exact same model, so that's funny. It's just they shoved it into the gun to make it look a little bit different. Unfortunately, though, the old one does have fire selector markings, and that's missing from the new one, which maybe hopefully they can add in the future, but I don't see them doing that. Anyways, more changes is the charging handle. The charging handle is more straight and realistic looking as opposed to the stylized, cartoonish, angled one that is on the old one. So, yeah. And unfortunately, also the texture glitch still exists, but that's a different thing. So, besides the very obvious removal of the additional crap on the old gun, that's pretty much all the changes for the ballistic counterpart compared to the old one. Moving on, which does kind of crush my hopes and dreams, at least for the AUG, is the drum gun, because the drum gun has its compensator more straight and realistic looking, and I believe maybe a bit longer, as opposed to the stylized version of the old, which is very subtle. You can very, faintly see angles towards it. You can just kind of see there's a little bit of differences when just looking at it like this, kind of, but I don't know, it's still hard to see. But before I get on to the other gun with a small change, the fact that this doesn't have a custom foregrip kind of does crush my dreams if the AUG ever is added to ballistic, because I mean they just stuck the normal vertical foregrip model onto the M1A1 furniture, which kind of sucks. But you never know. Maybe they can also change this in the future, but I don't see that. And if they do change, hopefully they add a mag release and a fire selector, which would unfortunately would mean they'd have to change the animation just a little bit, but that would just only be with the hand on the actual pistol grip, and it would be much of a big deal because they just had to animate the thumb, and that I don't think maybe would be too hard. But yeah, I don't see them doing that either. And the bigger change is maybe properly putting the charging handle on top, but that's only if they don't think of adding modularity to ballistic weapons. Because if they do, they'd have to keep the charging handle is, which is why the old one has the charging handle on the side anyways, and it's just unfortunately kept on the ballistic counterpart rather than put on the top. But I mean, hey, it's whatever, because that's even a bigger question than making a custom foregrip or adding fire selector and a magazine release on the ballistic counterpart. So the last change is similar to the last one, but it's the muzzle device. The muzzle device on the old Ranger pistol is angled, although the threading is more realistic. On this one, the angled isn't necessarily. It's more straight on this one, but unfortunately, they also kept the threading straight, so that's unfortunate. I would also like to point out that I thought it was completely flat, but there's an angle at the end of the slide, which isn't necessarily present on the Mark 23/USP. But again, they made the slide lock and like not fire selector, the safety of it mirrored as well. So that's unfortunate. But that's kind of about it for these weapons. Not much else. There might be more changes, but that's all I caught with that one having bigger changes. So it gives me slight hope for weapons that come to ballistic, but not too much hope, at least because the drum gun doesn't have a custom foregrip to make it look more proper like the M1928, at least just by a bit. So there is that. Hopefully, they could do these changes in the future. It's a live service game, so it's not out of the question necessarily. But I don't necessarily bank on them doing it. So there is just that.